Bezos Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Chullin Daf Lamed Daled, number 34, and we're going to start off from Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. The Gemara is dealing with a problem in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said on Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, the Mishnah said that if, it infers that if your hands were tamei, let's say you didn't wash your hands in the Tilas Yadayim, so your hands are sheni. If you shecht an animal and it's susceptible to tumah, you're going to make this animal into a shlishi. So the Gemara proved that this animal that you shechted was a chulin animal. Wait, so what's the problem? Your hands that are sheni cannot make the meat that you shechted a shlishi, because there's no such a thing of a shlishi in chulin. In chulin terms, there's no such a thing of a shlishi. In truma terms, there is a shlishi. And if you're dealing with kachim, there is something called a ravi, it goes. But chulin can never go to a shlishi. So what is our Mishnah talking about? That had your hands been tameh, it would have been mitama the meat. So the Gemara is going to say an interesting thing. And this is a concept of pretending. You could pretend that your chulin food is truma, and therefore it would take on even a shlishi. If you pretend it's truma, if you pretend you eat only like truma, then your chulin food, even if it's not truma, will be like truma and will be a shlishi. And hence, it has halachas of a shlishi, that if it would touch a piece of kachim, it would make it a ravi. It could be mitama kachim. Now, why would a person think about his chulin foods being truma? And the answer to that question is that, let's say you have a son-in-law who is a kohen and he comes over often. So you want to train your family to eat only like he would eat, truma, on the level that truma. So you pretend that all your food, whether it's truma or not, is going to be treated as if it's truma, and it becomes like truma, and therefore it's possible for your chulin food to become a shlishi. Then it could even be further. If you could pretend that something is kachim, your chulin is kachim, and this is what our Mishnah is going to be talking about. You pretended that your chulin is kachim, and what the Gemara is going to say, that according to Reb Lezer, if you pretend that your food, your meat is kachim, we'll treat it like kachim, and it can even become a ravi'i. Now, why would a person think that all his food is kachim? Let's say he's a rich family and they bring a lot of kachim into their house. They bring a lot of shlomims. They live near Yerushalayim and they're always eating kachim meat. So even their chulin meat, they want to eat out like pretending that it's kachim meat. So that's what we're talking about. You shechted a chulin. How do I know it's chulin? Because obviously it said the word chaya. So you shechted a animal that's a wild animal, but it's a chulin meat. But you could pretend that it's kachim. And if you pretend that it's kachim, then even if your hands are tamei a sheni, it could make this chulin meat into a shlishi. Now we read the Gemara inside, and let's read it. Okay, so we're going to start from Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis towards the bottom. Amar Rab Laza Amar Yishaya. Okay, here we go. Make it a drop bigger. Okay. Amar Rab Laza Amar Rab Yishaya. Hacha. In our discussion over here in our Mishnah is bechulin shenasa al taharas ha kodesh, that you pretended the chulin should be treated like kodesh. Udalai ki Rabbi Yeshua. And we're not going to go like Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua is of the opinion that you can't pretend chulin to be kachim. It doesn't work. It doesn't work, chulin to be kachim, because since most people don't have kachim in their house, why would Chachamim make that if someone pretends his chulin is kachim, we're going to treat it like kachim? No, it doesn't work. Rabbi Yeshua says it doesn't work. Rabbi Lezer says it does. And where do we see Rabbi Yeshua saying that? So our Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Lezer. The Tanya we learned in a brisa. Rabbi Lezer says, "Ha'oichel rishon rishon." If you eat a rishon, you become a rishon. Sheni, if you eat food that's a sheni, you become a sheni. Shlishi, if you eat food that's a shlishi, no matter how it became a shlishi, you become a shlishi. So if you look at the picture, you have three breads over here. One is a rishon, the red, the green is a sheni, and the blue we'll call a shlishi. So Rabbi Lezer says, whatever you eat, you become. If you eat a rishon bread, you become a rishon. Now, if you're a regular guy, you're a regular Yisrael. If you eat a sheni bread, you become a sheni. If you eat a shlishi bread, you become a shlishi. Now, why would you become? Why a human being can never become tummy through a food? The Chumash says that you can't become tummy through a food. Why did Chachamim say that if you eat a bread that's tummy, you become tummy? And not only that, you become tummy like the bread itself. And the answer is because we're afraid that if you were a kohen and you're eating a tummy bread, and then you're going to drink grape juice that's truma, and they're going to mix the grape juice that's truma in your mouth with the tummy bread. So then your bread in your mouth is going to be tummy the grape juice. So by saying that whoever eats tummy bread becomes tummy, you're not going to drink truma while you're eating tummy bread. So the bottom line is, Rabbi Lezer says, whatever you eat, you become a rishon, you become a rishon, sheni, you become a sheni, a shlishi, you become a shlishi. Now, how is it possible, a regular guy, to have a shlishi in his house? So two ways. How do you have a shlishi bread? You pretended that you were eating truma. You pretended all your breads are truma bread. So it's possible your bread is a shlishi. Or, with the way Rabbi Lezer says, if you pretend that you're eating kachim, so you could pretend that a meat, let's say, is a kachim meat, that's a shlishi. So therefore, if you ate it, you become a shlishi. That's Rabbi Lezer's opinion. So Rabbi Lezer says, no matter what you pretend, if you pretend it's truma, or if you pretend it's kachim, it's possible to have a shlishi in your house, a regular Jew to have a shlishi in his house. Rabbi Yeshua says back into the Gemara, no, ha'oichel rishon this sheni. If you eat a rishon or a sheni, you go down a notch. So then sheni, you're only a sheni. Shlishi, but if you eat a shlishi, what happens? You eat a shlishi. Sheni lekodesh, then sheni letruma. You become a sheni. That means if you eat a shlishi, you become a sheni regarding kodesh. That means that it's not, you even go up a notch when it refers to kodesh. So you're a shlishi, you ate a shlishi, you become a sheni, and you can't touch him, because if you're going to touch him, it's going to become a shlishi. So you went up a notch. But ain't sheni l'truma, but you don't go up a notch with truma. You just remain the shlishi by truma. So technically, if you remain a shlishi by truma, so if you touch truma, it's not going to become a revi, because there's no such a thing of revi by truma. But you still, remember this point, you still can't eat the truma. You're still a tamei shlishi. But the bottom line is, Rabbi Yeshua adds these following words: "Bechulin shenasal taras truma," that we're referring to that you pretended your chulin is truma. Therefore, it's possible for you to have a shlishi in your house. So we make an inference. Al taras truma, and Rabbi Yeshua said you can only pretend you have truma. Al taras kodesh loy. You can't pretend that you have kodesh in your house. In other words, if you pretend you have kodesh, you did nothing. It's regular chula meat. It could only be a shemi. Kesuva, because Rabbi Yeshua holds chulin shnasa taras kodesh less behu shlishi. Chulin that you're pretending it's kodesh. There's no such thing of a shlishi. It just remains a sheni. So Rabbi Yeshua holds you can pretend that something is truma, and you can't pretend that something is kodesh. So our Mishnah that says that you're touching meat with your sheni hands, making it a shlishi, is because we're referring to somebody who's pretending the meat is kodesh, and therefore he can make it into a shlishi. So the Gemara is going to ask, why can't our Mishnah go like Rabbi Yeshua, and he's pretending the meat is truma meat? Because the Gemara is going to say there's no such a thing of truma meat, so it cannot be truma meat. That's the Gemara's question. Let us say, we go to Amid Aleph, the chulim shenasa taras truma of Rabbi Yeshua, that our Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Yeshua, and he's pretending the meat in our Mishnah is truma meat, and therefore the Mishnah is telling you don't touch it with your sheni hands. And says the Gemara, loisal kadaitach, I can't think that the ktani basa, because our Mishnah is talking about meat. The ibit truma, if he's pretending the meat is truma, basa meika. Truma is in grains, not in truma, in meat. Elamai, if you want to tell me that our Mishnah is talking about kachim, chaya bekachim meika, our Mishnah is not talking about he's eating actual kachim. He's pretending it's kachim. But why would I say that he could pretend a wild animal is kachim? Wild animals can never be kachim. And says the Gemara, you're right. But basa michla, you could your chulin wild animal that you're eating, you could eat it al taharas hakodesh, because meat. Once you say that you can pretend let's say, a lamb chop could be kodesh. You could say your wild deer could be venison meat could be kodesh. It could be pretended, even though it's not possible for a deer to be brought as a korban. Fine, all of them will be treated as if kodesh, and therefore they could reach the level of shlishi. Basa beperi loy mechlaf, but meat and fruit cannot be exchanged, and therefore, and because of that, therefore, it's impossible to say that he was eating the meat pretending it's truma. So our Mishnah cannot go like Rabbi Yeshua. Our Mishnah could only go like Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer says a person in his house, he's a regular guy, he can pretend that his food is truma, and then it will take on the halachas of truma and it can become a shlishi, and he can pretend that something is kodesh, and therefore it could take on the halachas of kodesh, where it could become shlishi and a revi. And our Mishnah is talking about a guy who pretend that his meat is kachim, and therefore we're telling him, if your hands are tamei, don't eat this meat because your hands as a sheni will make it a shlishi. Omar Ula, but that only presumes that Rabbi Yeshua doesn't hold of this concept that a person could pretend that something is kodesh. But Omar Ula said, Chavrayan Amrei, Bechulin Shanasa al Taras kodesh like Rabbi Yeshua. My friends say that Rabbi Yeshua does not hold you could pretend something is kodesh. Therefore, our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yeshua. But Amina Rabbi Yeshua. But I say our Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Yeshua. And Rabbi Yeshua, who said that the case of a shlishi was only because a person was thinking, where our illustration was, Rabbi Yeshua says that if you eat a shlishi, you become a sheni l'kodesh, and he says that this shlishi became because you pretended it was truma, right? So Rabbi Yeshua, don't take him so seriously. He didn't have to tell you. Of course, you can make a shlishi pretending something is kodesh. The isbu shlishi. Rabbi Yeshua is telling you a side in that if you pretend something is a truma, it'll take on a shlishi. It's not only by kodesh, but also by truma. But Rabbi Yeshua doesn't argue on this idea that a person could pretend his meat to be kachim. He doesn't argue on that idea, and therefore Ula said, I would say that our Mishnah could even come out like Rabbi Yeshua. But my friends disagree with me. Man Chavraya, Rabba Babachana, Rabba Babachana. Rabba Babachana, Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, okay? Rabba Babachana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And when you look at the conversation that Rabbi Yochanan quoted between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua, it's going to come out. Rabbi Yeshua says specifically in his version of the conversation that you cannot imagine a person cannot imagine something to be kodesh when it's not. So what was the conversation between Rabbi Lezer and Yeshua? Remember, Rabbi Lezer says that when you eat a rishon, you become a rishon. Sheni become a sheni. Shlishi become a shlishi. Rabbi Yeshua says, if you eat a rishon or a sheni, you are a sheni, you go down. But if you eat a shlishi, you're also to eat truma, but you consider it as a sheni regarding kodesh. So now, Amar like Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yeshua. What Rabbi Lezer said to Yeshua, you should always, when somebody eats something, you should become more than the food even, or at least as strict as the food. Because metzinu oichel chamim min oichel. The food is the person eating the food is more stricter than the food itself. Where do you find that? If a guy is eating a piece of chicken that's tame, okay, let's bring up a guy who's eating a piece of chicken. He's eating a piece of a Jewish guy. If he would touch this is Nevela chicken. If he would touch the chicken, he would not become tame because a chicken is a tar bird, and it's not matama benigia. But if you swallow it, the ilu nivla saif vila oichla. But if the man would eat it, matama begodama basically, he's kind of like an av. That not only is he tame, his clothing got tame. So therefore, we see that the eater is more stricter. The human is more stricter than the food itself. So let's say that the food that the eater should be like the food itself. If you're eating a rishon, you should become a rishon. That's how Rabbi Eliezer played the whole thing up. That if you eat a rishon, you should become a rishon. According to Rabbi Yeshua, if you eat a rishon, you become a sheni. Rabbi Yeshua, Minivlas Oiftar Lagamrina, we don't learn it from Nivlas Oiftar, the Chidushu, because that's a novel idea. Because really, if you touch an item that's tamei, you touch a sheretz, you should become tamei. By a bird, by a kosher bird, the Torah gives you like a whole chiddush. It's a whole novelty that if you eat the bird, you become tamei. That's a whole novel idea that you can't learn from that. But generally, the food could be even more chomer than the person himself. For example, a dead sheretz, right? A dead rodent. If a dead sheretz, if the sheretz is an av, but the human that touches it becomes a rishon. So, Ella, Rabbi Yeshua says like this: I find food to be more stricter than the eater. Another food to be mitama a food, let's say one bread to be mitama another bread, it has to be the size of a kebeya, an egg. And a person eating, how much does a person have to eat in order to be tamei? If you eat a tamei bread, how much do you have to eat? You have to eat a half a loaf of bread in order to be tamei. You see, it's not when you eat one loaf, one piece of crumb, you become tamei. You have to eat the half a loaf. So 2 eggs. So we see that the eater is less stricter than the food, and therefore, I'm going to say that if you eat the bread, you're not. If you eat a rishon, you become a sheni. So that's what he says. How am I going to make the eater like the food itself? The food is more stricter. He doesn't want to learn tumah from shir. That's not a good. That's the amount of time eating, but it's not the food itself. It's not the eater himself. But another question Rabbi Lazar had, according to your word, you said it beautiful. A rishon, if you eat a rishon, you become a sheni, fine. The eater becomes a sheni. But sheni lama. The question is, you're a sheni and you eat a sheni food. Why do you become a sheni? According to your logic, you should become a shlishi because you're saying you always go down a notch. Because the reason why you don't go down a notch, because not every sheni makes a shlishi. Because in this example, this you should know, you have a sheni bread. The green bread is sheni. If it touches water, you don't say the water is shlishi. The water becomes a rishon. And then if it would touch another bread, it becomes a sheni. So through this bread, it doesn't necessarily lead to a shlishi. So therefore, if the eater eats the sheni bread, he will become a sheni. That's what Rabbi Yeshua answered Rabbi Lezer. If you're going with that logic, so Rabbi Lezer says, okay, then let the guy not become a sheni, he should become a rishon. Any sheni that touches water makes it a rishon. I agree with that concept. Like you said, except the tvul yaim, the person who went to the mikveh, but normal shenis could make the liquid into a rishon. So if so, when somebody eats a sheni, he should be like liquid and he should become a rishon. V'oid, another question, shlishi sheni lama. You said another thing, Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Lezer is like pounding Rabbi Yeshua. He says, when you eat a shlishi, you become a sheni. Now that's totally, why do you go up? Answers the Gemara, Amalai. So Rabbi Yeshua said, and here's the key. I only said that when you eat a shlishi, how did this bread become a shlishi? Because you pretended it was truma. So then you become a sheni regarding kodesh. Why? Shetarasa, we go to Amid Beis, Tuma who eats a kodesh, because a shlishi is always tamei regarding kodesh. So therefore, you become a sheni, somebody who could be mitama kachim. That's what Rabbi Yeshua said. But what you clearly said, he added those words that I only said that if you eat a shlishi, you become a sheni, is only if you pretended it was truma. But if you pretended it was kachim and it became a shlishi, there's no such a thing. You could pretend something to be kachim. So that's how Rabbi Yochanan learned that Rabbi Yeshua said clearly that you can never pretend something to be kachim and it will take on to be a shlishi. Only if you pretend it's truma, then you can make it into a shlishi. But kachim, no, there's no such a thing. So that was Rabbi Yochanan saying that. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Basi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yana. Here again, we have Rabbi Yochanan, and here we're going to say something different. Rabbi Yochanan said, let's say you eat a shlishi that of a meat, a piece of meat, chulin, that was pretended it was kodesh, and it became a shlishi. What do you become? So, nasa gufa sheni lekodesh. You don't become a ravi'i, you become a sheni. Your body becomes a sheni, so you go up a notch. So you pretended something, a piece of meat was kachim, and in this, and now who's obviously he's going with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, but you go up a notch because according to Rabbi Lezer, you should be a shlishi. But here, Rabbi Yochanan said that if you eat a piece of meat that you pretended it was kachim, you become a sheni. Esvei Rabbi Yosei Rabbi Asi shlishi sheni lekodesh vein sheni letruma bechulim shnasa al taras truma. The only time a shlishi could become, our Brisa said that Rabbi Yeshua said a shlishi could only be in a place where you're pretending it's truma. Al taras truma and al taras kodesh law. You can't pretend something that is kachim to take on a shlishi. It's impossible. So how do you say that if you eat a shlishi that you of food that you pretended it's kashim, you become a sheni? That's impossible. Amalei, let me buy a kami. Rabbi Yeshua didn't mean. Rabbi Yeshua he says, Rabbi Yana, he says, oh, Rabbi Yeshua didn't mean that you can't pretend something is kashim. So the Gemara says back, V'ha af ani loy amarti ela betruma kama. Rabbi Yochanan, quoting Rabbi Yeshua in the previous, said that Rabbi Yeshua was pretty specific and says, I don't say that a person can make a shlishi, a regular guy can make a shlishi only betruma, only if he's pretending it's truma, not if he's pretending it's kachim. So how could Rabbi Yochanan disagree with himself? Answers the Gemara, Amaroim minhu, v'alibid Rabbi Yochanan. It's a machlekes Amaroim, what Rabbi Yochanan said, and how Rabbi Yochanan understood Rabbi Yeshua. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan, in one version, understood Rabbi Yeshua that he's pretty specific, that you can only pretend your chulin food is truma, but you cannot pretend your chulin food is kachim. And then Rabbi Yochanan said, no, Rabbi Yeshua would agree to that. You could pretend your chulin food is also kachim. So either way, our Mishnah, either it goes according to Rabbi Lezer, or it could even go according to Rabbi Yeshua, according to one version of Rabbi Yochanan. And our Mishnah is talking about your hands are a sheni, you shechted your chulin meat, and you pretended it's kachim, and therefore, Mishnah says, if your hand was tameh, if it touches it, it will become a shlishi. Now the Gemara says another thing. Ula said, Ula said, and this is the final thing we're learning. Let's say you pretended, again, the whole machlokes is only kachim, but truma, you could always pretend your chulin is truma. And the reason is, like I said, because if you have a son-in-law that always comes over and he's a kohen, so you want to encourage the people in your house to treat everything like truma. So you have a chulin food that became a shlishi because you're treating it as if you're pretending it's truma. So you ate a shlishi. So technically, if you would touch truma food now, you can't make a revi by truma, so it would not a problem. But you can't eat it. Nifsal gufoy melecha b'truma. You yourself, as a shlishi, cannot be eating truma. So the Gemara says, "My kamashmalan." What is Ula teaching me? Isn't that what the Mishnah says? Tanina, isn't that what the Mishnah is talking about? Shlishi. If you eat a shlishi, sheni lekodesh, vein sheni letruma, b'chulin shnas al taras truma. If you're eating chulin, you're pretending it's truma, right? And you're a shlishi, so you become a sheni. You go up a notch, and you're a sheni if you touch kachim, but you're not a sheni vis-a-vis truma. So if you touch truma, it's not going to become a shlishi because you yourself are a shlishi. But the Mishnah doesn't give you a license now that you're a shlishi in respect to truma that you could go eat truma. Sheni hu delay hava hashlishi hava. The Mishnah agrees that you're a shlishi and you can't eat just stam pop truma into your mouth. And says the Gemara, so what do I need Ula to teach me that? It's a Mishnah. So the Gemara says, "Ima he have." I mean, if I would just have the Mishnah, I would think that the Mishnah is saying even more than that. Lo sheni hava, lo shlishi hava. With respect to truma, you're nothing. If you eat a shlishi, you're nothing. You're not even tamei, and therefore you could eat truma. I did the Tani sheni kaddish name ain't sheni betruma kamash malam. That when the Mishnah says, "Oh, you're not a sheni, you're a sheni lekodesh, but you're not a sheni letruma," the Mishnah could have said you're not tamei with regarding truma, but the language fit in this way. So, but don't take it so seriously. Kamash malan, Ula is saying no, you have to take it seriously, and the Mishnah is teaching you this concept, and Ula is bringing it out that if you eat a shlishi, don't think of yourself as a shlishi. Now I could touch truma, I could eat truma. No, you can't touch. You could touch truma. It's not going to become tamei because there's no ravi, but you cannot eat the truma. And finally, the Gemara asked this last question. Rav Hanuna asked Ula. Ula said that if you eat chulin that became a shlishi because you pretended it was truma, you yourself become a shlishi, and you're not allowed to eat truma. This Bryce is going to say you could eat truma. Harishan shebechulem. If you ate a rishon of chulem, tamei matame. If you touch, you can make a sheni, and that sheni can make a shlishi with respect to truma. Vasheni. If you eat sheni, so you become a sheni. So therefore, paisel, you can make truma a shlishi. The shlishi of truma cannot make a ravi in truma. V'hashlishi, but let's say you ate a shlishi. Oh, nechel bezid hanedema. You can take the shlishi. Let's say you have shlishi food in front of you. You have a bread that's a shlishi. Okay, let's bring up a bread that's a shlishi, the blue bread. Okay. And you could put spices all over it. Let's say, garlic powder. That's truma, and eat it. Now, wait a second. Let's say he takes a slice of the bread. He becomes a shlishi. You told me that when you're shlishi, you can't eat anything of truma. As soon as you bite into it, you become a shlishi, and you cannot eat truma. Safina le'midi deposa le'gufa. Are they going to feed you now truma? Spices in a cook, or spices on a piece of bread, of truma spices that on a piece of bread. Your whole body is now, because you took a bite in the bread, you're a shlishi. You cannot eat truma, and that's not like what Ula said. Ula said you cannot eat truma, and this Brisa says you could eat the truma. Amalei, so Ula will respond, Hanach lezid hadema. Don't, mind you, leave go that question of a pot that's cooked that has truma in it. We go to Amid of Lamed Hey, the lake of Kazayas b'steach pras. You see, in addition to eating truma, when you're tamei, you have to eat it in the share of like 9 minutes or whatever, 3-4 minutes of eating achilas pras. And if it's just spices, little spices, you're not going to eat a kazayas of truma in that shear. So therefore, although you can't eat an apple of truma if you ate a shlishi, but to eat spices in a soup or something like that, you're not going to eat a kazayas in that of the truma spices in the span of 4 or 5 minutes. So therefore you're allowed to eat in that scenario. You're allowed to eat the truma, but normally you're not allowed to eat the truma. Even though we say chatzi shir is also minat Torah, but here the whole idea of eating a shlishi, you become also to eat truma, is only midrabanan anyway. So there's no such a thing of a chatzi shir. It's only if you're tamei daraisa, yes, you can eat like a crumb of truma, but if you're only tamei darabanan because you ate a shlishi, so then you can eat spices because you're never going to eat a kazayas of the spices in the time period of achilas pras. Okay, we'll stop over here.
Thank you very much.